Christine. Alleluia. Once he died our souls to save. Alleluia. Where's thy victory, boasting grave? Alleluia. For we know where Christ has led. Alleluia. Following our exalted head. Alleluia. Made like him we rise. Alleluia. Christ has opened paradise.
So, today, we come to look at this end of the series for Waiting Room and how humor can play a part in our getting through the other side. What is humor? What's the nature of humor? Well, the very nature of humor is this. It is when you have something that usually you thought was going to happen, and then what? Something surprising happens that you didn't expect, and we laugh or we chuckle. Yes, we laugh and we chuckle or we become giddy because that which you had expected was something happened completely unexpected. That's how humor occurs. And in that sense, have you ever thought about the Easter story being a funny story? Really? Think about it. All that we had thought maybe was going to had happened after death's final blow had been laid on that Friday was completely turned around, completely surprising at an empty tomb that we just read about today. It is that sense, my friends, that sense of what the Easter story is that gave birth around the 6th or 7th century of what became known as Holy Humor Sunday. What would happen in those early Orthodox churches is that the people would gather with the priest and they would come and they would sing and they would dance and they would tell jokes to one another to celebrate the humor of this day. And so, in the spirit of that ancient tradition, let me try a little levity myself with a little Easter humor, don't you know? Did you hear about the man who took his family? Yeah, all the good jokes start that way, don't they? Did you hear? Did you hear about the man who took his family to the Holy Land, to Israel, including his mother-in-law? And unfortunately, while there, his mother-in-law passed away there in Jerusalem. And upon learning this and starting to get the affair settled, the man went to the consulate to make sure what he needed to do next. And he said, I want to make sure I get my mother-in-law back to the States. What must I do? Well, the delegate there at the consulate's office said to him, now, sir, I want you to know, it's going to be very, very costly to get your mother from Israel back to the States for burial. He said, oh, that's okay. I can afford any cost. He goes, oh, the consular said, the affection you feel for your mother-in-law must be very deep and very sincere. I give such regard to that. He goes, oh, no, don't misunderstand. The man said, I hear that there are people who die in this land and come back 3 days later, and I can't take that chance. You see, that's how humor works. And on this day, Easter humor is absolutely needed in this 21st century rational mind that we all have in order for us to begin to make spiritual sense out of the meaning of this story. For it is the humor of this story that allows us to grasp the spiritual insensibilities of what this story could mean. And so allow me to point out at least two ways the humor in the Easter story can speak to us so that the Easter meaning may become more alive for us. First, let me say this. It is humor. It is humor that helps us overcome our fears. As we read in the text a minute ago, we read that these traveling party, these women, are headed towards the tomb on the first day of the work week in order to finish up the burial process with the spices that they had ready to go. And while the sun was rising on that morning, it was still, the shutters of their soul were very closed. It was dark still for them. Yes, death, not life, dominated their mood. And so they're traveling there, still experiencing the shock and the terror of what they had just been through. And now they're concerned with anxiety about how their stone's going to be rolled away. You can almost hear them talking with everything of their spirits coming out. And as you hear this, when they get there, the tragedy must have felt like it was compounded when they find that the body was gone. In some accounts, it says it was assumed to be stolen. And they thought, what else can go wrong in this scene? Well, of course, as we read, they're met by a man. It says a man, by the way, in the text. Now, he's wearing white, it says. And though he's not an angel, he says he's a man. He does speak angelic words when he says, do not be alarmed, do not fear to them. Now, who is this man? I don't know if we can say for sure, but we can be a little playful with the entire text of this week, this last week called Holy Week. Could this be the same man who in Mark chapter 14, in verse 51, was running away from the garden the night Jesus was arrested? If you read the text, what it tells us is that this man, and all this was unfolding during the arrest of Jesus, ran away, and a Roman guard reached out and grabbed his linen cloth, and upon grabbing his linen cloth, it said it fell, and he ran away unclothed. Now, play with me a little bit here. Remember, it's humor. Could this man who had lost all his dignity on the night of Jesus' arrest be the man now who is poised, speaking words of assurance? Do not be afraid or alarmed. Could we think this writer? What's this writer up to? Perhaps alluding to this same man. But if we think about it in those terms, doesn't a grin go on your face? Doesn't your heart get a little more joyful? If you think about it in those terms, the absurdity that surrounded this man, somehow God still used. And it kind of lessens our own anxiety and fear when that smile and that joy fills our heart. I don't know. Maybe that's somewhat what these visiting party, the burial party, felt upon seeing and hearing this man. Well, we know what they felt. The text tells us. It says when they left there with terror and amazement. Now, obviously, they were feeling the fear or the terror of it all because there's no way that in their rational mind that they could ever imagine that this could happen. And so they were terrified. Of course, you would be too. I would. All of us would. But it also says they were amazed. You know what it looks like on your body or your face to be amazed? Perhaps a grin, perhaps a wow. But at least there was some degree of amazement of what had happened when they saw this empty tomb. It's good to think about these first ones who perhaps sensed the irony of what was happening on this Easter morning. Oh, but so many of us live with fear lurking around every corner. One of my favorite places to have breakfast is Java Cafe there in Round Rock, not too far from my house. Just a couple weeks ago, there were two elderly gentlemen who were having a conversation about the state of our nation. And oh, my, were their words. They were obviously very concerned that their sizable portfolio, they were speaking loud, don't you know? Their sizable portfolio wasn't going to be able to, one they'd worked hard for, they said that a number of times, wasn't going to be large enough to sustain their already comfortable lifestyle. And the angst at that table, the doomsday scenarios I overheard scared me to death. And that's how so many of us live. But my friends, while it is true, the cross of Jesus Christ tells us that terrible things do happen. We can overcome and put aside the fears of those terrible things that can happen. They do not have to debilitate us. Not at all. My friends, think about this. If you can begin to see your life through irony and humor and all those events that surround you with a little bit of levity, you know what'll happen? It'll not only lift your spirit a little bit, keep you upright, but it may help you let go of the fears that control you, and particularly trying to control things which you fear, which is exhausting and will eventually debilitate you. No doubt. Unless you think your pastor is a jester who doesn't really get it, and maybe you don't want to take it too seriously because I'm talking about humor dealing with real life problems. Let me remind you of maybe a therapeutic principle that takes place with those who counsel families in crisis. Edwin Friedman, the father of family systems, says that when you're dealing with a family crisis, it is appropriate to use humor to help the family because it keeps things a little loose. If things are a little loose, you can then work on things because they're not too tight. So think about that. Appropriate humor, well-placed humor can become the antidote for our fears and our anxieties, says the best practices of mental health. My friends, I know when I enter into a place and I am loose enough, the other people are loose enough too. It works. Humor has a way of helping us overcome the fears this Easter story tells us. But second, humor has a way of keeping us present in the moment. Those disciples must have surely thought they would never encounter Jesus again like they did in their everyday lives. Oh, maybe in their mind they thought they might be able to access him in some spiritual way, some fairy tale netherworld with their Peter Pan imaginations or prayers. I mean, that's what they thought. But you know what? Not a single text, including the one we read today, gave any indication that Jesus' departure was going to be permanent. And those feelings that we have, that they must have had when he left, he's gone forever, have no validation in his own words or in the biblical text left behind. But we understand it, don't we? It was almost impossible, hard for them to imagine. Hard to imagine that somehow the next chapter of their lives after his death would be played out in the usual and familiar places that they knew in Galilee. But isn't that what the man told them? Jesus has gone ahead of you into Galilee. Do you see the irony of that? You see the humor of that? Somehow, what they thought might have been some future tale with a sequel yet to be to come was going to be a present tense narrative for the now. Somehow this resurrection power that we speak of wasn't necessarily going to come from far above them, but it was going to come as they walked along shorelines, as they fished together, as they ate breakfast together, along a road called Emmaus. But they had to do what? They had to get out from behind those closed doors and go to those usual places. And in those usual places, there they would find new life. Parents love to play this game with their kids, particularly if you have two kids, that is. You know, one child will start this way. It says, he's my daddy, or she's my mommy. And then what does the other one do? No, he's my daddy. No, she's my mommy. You've seen the game played out. Parents sometimes let it go on a little too long. It kind of props up our ego to hear the kids compete for their love for us. But parenting 101 truth is what? Every child we have in that home is different, is a unique individual whom God has made in the most formed and shaped way that only they can be. And when it comes to parenting our children, we parent them in the present moment for the present challenge and what they face. And that might look different from one child to the other depending on where they're at. Why do I say that to you today? My friends, if you can catch the Easter sense of humor in this passage, you can see that God instinctively cares and loves for your person and your unique personality in the most remarkable and surprising ways. You don't have to have the thrill of heaven until you have to wait to get to heaven, friends. No, not at all. Just relish in the joy and the surprising ways that God shows up in our lives right now on this Easter day. And the more awareness you have of that, the more you sense that God is present with you now, my friends. The more you'll know the power of Christ from a story that wasn't so long ago, but occurs right now in your life today. But my friends, it takes a little bit of sense of humor to get there. To understand that God is fond of you and you can be fond of God. I'll tell you where that phrase comes from. A few years ago, I did a silent retreat there at Christ in the Desert Monastery outside of Abiquiu, New Mexico. 72 hours of silent retreat. 1 hour a day, I got to meet with a spiritual guide, an advisor, one of the brothers who would share with me or ask me how my soul was. The brother was telling me, we were in one of those conversations, why he likes the monastery life, why the cloistered life with the brothers did him well. And here's what he said, just what I said a minute ago. He goes, it's in this place that I realize God is fond of me, and I'm more fond of God. And then he laughed. I'll never forget his laugh. And suddenly I felt in my own heart, in that stark dining room in those upper high deserts of New Mexico, that somehow God was fond of me. And I could be more fond of God right there. But it takes a light heart, my friends, to see that. My friends, these disciples were not silent while they were maybe terrified and amazed. Eventually, they would tell their own Easter story in the days and years to come. And as I mentioned a moment ago, Mark's gospel ends with just kind of a strange way. This Easter story ends in a way that ends without ending. It's like the conclusion has three little ellipses, 1, 2, 3 at the last, like more to come. But maybe, just maybe this ragtag ending in the Gospel of Mark is an invitation for you and I to let the spiritual insensibilities raise up our sense of humor about what God can do so that we might overcome these fears and we might be with God in this present moment as God is with us. So let me ask you, do you get the joke? It's kind of an inside joke, don't you know? If you can get the joke of the Easter humor, you can say it loud and clear. For when I say, Christ is risen, what say you? Christ is risen indeed. Happy Easter, my friend.